I'm fine. I've said I'm fine so many times. Sometimes I don't know how I feel, and other times I just can't say it. Fine isn't a feeling though. It doesn't help any of us, let alone me. Only when I know how I really feel can I do something about it. And only when we know how other people feel can we actually help them. What if we had an easy way to connect with our feelings and each other's? How Are We is an app that helps us understand how we feel by turning feelings into numbers. So we can keep track of how we feel and do what we need to help ourselves, to help each other, and the world together. So tell me, how are we, really? If you're done with Fine too, download How Are We from the App Store and go to howmental.com for more support.
Hello everyone, welcome. Really warm welcome to you. My name is Hamala Dedra. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Staff Wellbeing as a part of Now and Beyond 2024. I'm a pastoral support worker for Greenfield High School and a deputy of Year 7. So I've worked a lot around sort of student wellbeing and dealing with some quite complex issues with there, and obviously with the pastoral work combined with the year group work, there's a lot there that obviously we have to deal with. I'm joined today by the wonderful Monisha, and I will hand you over to her now just to introduce herself. Thanks.
Hi everybody, my name is Monisha Jeffcott. I am the training manager at Anna Freud, and my role there is to deliver training to school staff, so teachers, TAs, non-teaching staff, all around matters to do with mental health and well-being. So we cover a huge range of different sorts of topics as part of that training. And I'm really excited to be with you today just to talk to you about the very, very important issue around staff mental health and well-being. So thank you so much, Mal. It's really good to be here today.
Excellent, you're welcome. Thanks again. Really excited to have you here. So the aim of our sessions today is to provide useful and practical advice for staff. Again, thanks for everyone who sent in your questions around staff wellbeing and things like that. I'll just jump straight in and get to our first question. So the first question today is, how can teaching assistants support each other and promote each other's well-being amidst increasing workloads and the mental health demands of students?
Thank you. So I think this is a really, really important issue and question. And I just want to really emphasize the value that teaching assistants and non-teaching staff bring to schools. And, without those people in those really important roles, it would be very, very difficult for everybody to do their job effectively. And I know increasingly, because of some of the training that I deliver, that there are lots of teaching assistants who are supporting mental health and wellbeing in schools and doing an amazing job. But also aware that that can have an impact on individuals. And I think it's really important that we recognise and acknowledge how teaching assistants and non-teaching staff really need to be supported with what their well-being and thinking about some of the really tough stuff that they have to manage and hold. So some tips that I would suggest in order to help manage that would be things like, really including them in everything that the whole staff might be taking part in. So for example, staff surveys. So if there's staff surveys that are going on, that making sure teaching assistants and non-teaching staff are given an opportunity and time, more importantly, to be able to complete those surveys. So, often with teachers, they might have some training time when that will be available to them to complete the staff surveys, but mindful that teaching assistants obviously sometimes work different hours. So making sure they're given dedicated time so that their voices can be heard in those staff surveys. I think that's really important. And going alongside that, something else that I think is essential in their role is that they are included in all opportunities for staff training. So really sort of thinking about when training is being run, is the training going to be relevant to them in their role? Is it going to really support them in supporting young people and children with mental health and wellbeing? And so making sure that they can always participate. So being very inclusive really, and thinking about when would those opportunities arise and when can they actually attend. I think also thinking about how they can always be included in attending any social events that might be being run for staff, so that again it's about inclusivity, ensuring that they are able to attend and that they're invited. And then also really sort of thinking from a wider point, really, that the school is aware of any support that maybe the local authority are offering in terms of supporting with the cost of living, knowing what the local authority might offer in terms of support for key workers. So I know that some local authorities offer incentives around leisure centres, for example, but just making sure that there is someone in a senior position within a school who has that knowledge and information and can signpost that for teaching assistants and non-teaching staff as well, so that they know what is available to them and they can access it if they would like.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, it really makes a big difference, doesn't it? Allowing just including TAs and teaching assistants into that training so they can kind of have a toolkit to kind of know what they're up against. And I can imagine being included to more events, you know, it's just being able to decompress and like speak with other people about what you're going through and things like that can make a world of difference, can't it? So.
Absolutely. And I do think that sometimes, because of the nature of their working hours, and often teaching assistants are only paid for the time that they're actually with students. So actually really considering how it is more accessible for them to be able to have, you know, conversations with staff, connect with staff, because often that's like a piece that's really missing. It might be that teaching assistants are the ones who are like on duty when the staff might be together. So really sort of finding creative ways where that connection can happen and that information can be shared, even if it's in an informal way, you know, because I think that's really, really important. And I think it's something that schools really need to be aware of to ensure that there is that inclusivity so that everybody is on the same page and that all opportunities are available.
Yeah, great. Thank you for those. Thank you for those words. Next question I have for you, so Monisha, is in the face of diverse parenting approaches, how can educators promote mental health awareness and support children from varied backgrounds?
That's a really good question. And I think my background originally was teaching, so I kind of reflect on my own knowledge and experience of this, of which I have quite a lot because I worked in a really diverse community and a diverse school. So I think, you know, absolutely sort of understanding that there are differing views amongst parents from different cultures, and, you know, their approach towards mental health and wellbeing might be slightly different. And I think it's really important that schools are really aware of that, because there are some groups that find it much harder to talk about mental health and wellbeing. You know, the language could be different. There may not be a language. So again, it is about being inclusive, really considering how, you know, those parents could really become properly embedded as part of the school community and feel that they have a voice and an opportunity to be able to talk to people about concerns around mental health and wellbeing, for example. So what I would be really keen to promote would be, first of all, the person who is in the role of the senior mental health lead within the school has attended a training so that they know how to develop and launch a whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing. And one of the really key components of that is around parent and carer engagement. So really thinking about how you involve your parents and carers generally within your school community. How do you get them involved in these really critical conversations around mental health and wellbeing? Perhaps there's opportunities again for them to do some training around having the language to be able to talk confidently about mental health and wellbeing needs or issues that they may have within their families, perhaps within their own children. And I just think giving them an opportunity to have that voice is really, really important. Also, the school perhaps providing an opportunity for any external support that might be needed. So if, for example, you know, there is a language barrier, then perhaps finding somebody who can speak the language of some of your community to be able to give those messages and provide those opportunities to have those conversations about mental health and wellbeing. So again, I mean, not dissimilarly to the TAs, really, it's about finding a language that's common for all, where actually it's a culture and ethos within the school where talking about mental health and wellbeing is really, really acceptable and embraced, so that people feel really happy to come in and talk about those things. And it could be that, you know, there is a group that is set up. So perhaps thinking about setting up a mental health and wellbeing action group as part of your role as a senior mental health lead might be a really good way to encourage perhaps somebody from your parent and carer group to sit on that group, so that they then are hearing the messages that are being delivered to the school and having an opportunity to, get involved in a dialogue about it and talking about what it's like from their point of view. So I think it is, it's about connection, relationship building, and really encouraging those parents into your school so that you can start those dialogues. And it's not easy. I've done it myself. It takes time, it takes trust, it takes openness and transparency, but it is possible. And I think it provides a really important part of developing a whole school approach effectively.
It's so true, isn't it? It can take a lot of work to be reading from the same hymn sheet, but once you're there, it just makes all the world of difference, isn't it? Because you can navigate it with the communities together, entering like something that's quite new for them.
Absolutely. And I think, if you've got that connection, as you say, it can be really tricky to establish at the beginning. Certainly my experience was that it was really difficult. But once we got there and we had that connection, I was actually able to have some really quite challenging conversations with some of our families, because I had that connection and they were much more accepting of having that dialogue with me than they would have been if I just kind of called them in and then had a cold conversation. Do you know what I mean? I think it's really important that you've got that warmth and that relationship so that you can have those open and honest conversations.
100%. That's crucial. It's crucial. Thanks again. That's a wonderful answer. Next question I have. So what can SLT do to give staff more time to help with workload? As a senior mental health lead, how can I support staff wellbeing without sounding patronizing, and when all they want is a reduction of workload?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tricky one, Hamal. I think, workload is such an issue. I know on the latest Teacher Wellbeing Index that was published, we know that workload consistently comes up as being an area of concern for staff. And, you're constantly facing that battle. And with the best will in the world, you try and help with support for staff wellbeing. But, the workload is such an issue because there is so much to do. What you don't want to do is, by introducing lots of things to help with your well-being, that you find yourself giving more work. In effect, that's not helpful either. So I think, particularly in the role of a senior mental health lead, and that person who has that responsibility should sit on SLT. That's what we would absolutely recommend. We want to encourage staff to really sort of feel heard. So again, finding a way to have that dialogue, whether that's through a survey, whether that's through a much smaller group where people are able to bring any thoughts or feelings they have around the sort of approach. But I think really sort of thinking about the mental health and wellbeing offer within the school, how easy is it to access support should you need it? What are the practical things around it? When is space being offered, time for staff to be able to talk about how they're feeling? What kind of commitment is it for them? What's the frequency? Are you using someone external? I mean, it's really interesting. I have many examples of talking to schools where they've got someone external in, thinking that's going to really help address the problem. But interestingly, staff didn't want to talk to someone they didn't know. They were really not keen on that. So is there someone within your staff, or maybe a few people, because then it eases the burden on one person, who is able to offer some kind of support? We would really encourage staff to use a model of maybe reflective supervision. Again, not a clinical model of supervision, but reflective supervision, where staff can come and talk about how they're feeling and how things are going for them. So I think really sort of identifying that, really understanding that it's not one size fits all, but actually you need to ask staff what it is that's working and what's not working. If we hear that actually the workload is an issue, then really think as SLT, what can you practically and realistically do to address that? So, I know of schools that are even looking into kind of a flexible working approach. What could that look like? Is there any capacity, particularly in a large secondary school, where you might be able to offer some kind of flexibility around that? So really consider that. I think staff, if they were asked what they wanted, they want time. They're time poor, so they want time. Is there any opportunity when they do like their PPA time to be able to maybe go off site and do that? That could be something that could really be helped. Is there an opportunity that maybe you can have an afternoon of wellbeing instead of a staff meeting once a half term, perhaps? Maybe an early finish, maybe finishing a meeting early so that people can then be given the gift of time back. I think, those are all sort of quite practical things that could be done that might be really helpful. I think really encouraging staff to be boundaried. So really think about how they use their working time. And nobody wants to be told, well, this is what you need to do, because that's not helpful either. But just maybe sort of consider what works for one person in terms of how they choose to manage their time is going to be different for somebody else. So talk openly about, you know, maybe email etiquette, so not sending emails after a certain time. And if you do, don't expect a response if you prefer to work later. I think that's quite a good strategy. Think about marking. Is it realistic to say that everything has to be marked? Really consider the impact of workload on marking. What does that look like in your school? Can that be, you know, addressed? I think be really consistent with the sort of messaging that you're sending. And if you have meetings, then have a really set time when you finish and make sure you stick to that, even if you're not done. You just need to manage the time better. And maybe talk to staff about time management and actually being boundaried with their time and thinking about how they can use their time most effectively. So I know it's not necessarily, you know, a really easy fix, because it really isn't, because the workload thing is a huge issue. But really getting SLT to think about, you know, what is working and what do we really need to do, but what can we actually let go? And just because something is working well, there might be a better way to do it, which is a better management of time. So encouraging, you know, the senior team to really consider that if they want to be serious about reducing workload for staff. And it is someone who has to be really courageous to put their head above the parapet and say, you know what, we're going to do things differently, because it will really help support staff in terms of reducing their workload.
That's really interesting. Do you think that sometimes people might be sort of put off from asking because they might be worried, you know, oh, it's the same story for everyone else around here. Look, no one else has time. You just kind of have to deal with it. Do you think sometimes that can put people off?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really goes back to having that sort of transparency within staff. You know, there needs to be a mechanism for people to be able to have honest and open conversations. And whether that is through some kind of anonymous staff survey, that might be a really good way to address some of these concerns. And people might feel more confident then being able to respond honestly, but also having a way of capturing people's views and opinions in a safe space where they are able to speak openly, but then there is representation who can go direct to SLT and say, do you know what, this is the view of some of the staff. I'm giving you an anonymized view, but this is the view. And is there anything we can do to try and address that? But I absolutely agree, Hamal. I think there is, you know, a lot of stigma around admitting that you're finding it difficult to cope, because people straight away think, oh, you know, should they be in that senior position? Should they be holding this responsibility? And nobody wants to lose that. But at the same time, you know, data and statistics tell us that people are leaving the profession in their thousands. So, you know, staff retention is an issue. And in order to address that, we need to address the issue of burnout and workload.
Thanks so much for that. It's really helpful. And so the next question, so the penultimate question I have here, so how to put professional boundaries in place to protect staff from burnout. It's really important that one as well, you know.
Absolutely. And I think it kind of links to some of the things I've already touched on. So things like practical tips about managing daily workload. How do you do that? Making sure that you do take a break, because, you know, we talk about not being able to pour from an empty jug. We know how emotionally draining being a teacher is, and the demands placed on us, both from, you know, perhaps the senior team, as well as parents and carers, as well as, most importantly, your young people who you are working with. So really sort of thinking about how, you know, you can manage your own well-being within those days. So making sure that you do take a break, I think, is so important. And I think so many staff just think, I'll work through my lunch break and then I won't need to do as much after school. But actually, in order to manage an afternoon of teaching, you need to have had a break. You need to have taken some time away from, you know, your work. You need to maybe be able to do some kind of 5-minute walk outside is so good for you, and actually speak to colleagues, just have some downtime. And most importantly, have something to eat and drink, and, you know, do practice some self-care is really, really important. So I think when you see that modeled by senior people within your school, that's a really powerful way of saying, this is really important to us, and we really, really value you looking after yourself so that you are better able to manage your job. And I think it's really powerful to encourage your senior team to be seen to do that. You know, I've worked in schools where the head would come and sit with everyone else and have their lunch, and it sent a really clear message that I also need to eat, and it's really important that I find time to do that. I've said about the emails already, so really sort of thinking about sending that sort of, you know, email protocol where I might send emails out of working time, but I don't expect a response. I think making that really clear is really important. I think sort of really thinking about the marking in the school. So how are you making sure that that's manageable? Is it necessary to mark every single thing in triplicate? Probably not. So really consider how that's being managed, and looking at sort of technology and stuff that's out there to really support you. So there is loads of apps out there right now that can really help manage time. It can really help support with some of the systems that have to happen in school. So again, really encouraging staff to be able to do that. And yeah, you know, I think there will always be a to-do list, which will be long. And whilst you tick things off that you've done, you can guarantee there's more being added to the end. But I think saying to yourself, I'm only going to do 3 things at the top of my list is a really positive and helpful way to manage that, because you're never going to get to the end of it. And if you always in your head think, oh my goodness, I need to do more, then you're never ever going to manage, because your well-being is really going to suffer. So I think it is so much about being boundaried, practicing some really good self-care, which might appear selfish, but like I say, if it's something that becomes a culture and ethos within a school, then it's much more acceptable that that is a positive way to manage the workload and the burnout.
Yeah, so true. So true. I think there's a lot of things there that really hit close to home there as well. I mean, you know, the continual ticking list of things to do, and, you know, making it a non-negotiable, because I noticed with myself, especially with, you know, pastoral and year team work, there's a never-ending list of things to do. And sometimes, you know, you've got so much to do, and, you know, there's so little time to move around. Like for myself, I try and check in with my body and see how my body's doing. But actually, when there's so much going on, I can't actually feel my body. I just feel like a head kind of moving around, trying to do all these different things. And then I find for myself anyway, I can approach burnout and I won't realize, and I'll be well into burnout by then. But by having those kind of non-negotiable things for my well-being, you know, like some time for quiet in the morning, a bit of meditation and a bit of breathing, just for like anything from 5 to 10 minutes. Those little non-negotiable breaks prevent that from happening, because if you're like me, it's too late and I'm past burnout and I won't be able to realize, you know. So it's really
absolutely true. I remember when I was teaching and I was like in a senior position in a school, I used to leave really super early in the morning to avoid being stuck in a traffic jam on the M4. And I used to get into work, and the first thing I did was I used to do like a 20-minute walk just outside in the playground. We had like a track, and I just used to walk around it a few times, and it really set me up for the day. Like you say, it's a non-negotiable, and you can say to yourself, I really need to have that space and that time, because I need that for me. I need to carve that out. And as you say, it's a non-negotiable. I did it every single day without not doing it, and in the end it becomes part of your habit and it's part of your normal. And I think if you've got those things in place, it will really help support you when you've got to manage some quite tricky things.
Exactly. Yeah, otherwise, you know, burnout becomes the normal, doesn't it? So I think that's really
and I think something else you said, Hamal, which I think was really important, is like having a bit of meditation time. I would always say to people who say I don't have time to do that, just take a minute, a mindful minute. It sounds quite patronizing, but just 1 minute where you're just thinking about you and ignoring everything else that's going on. I just think it can give you just a sense of control that you maybe kind of lose sight of otherwise. So I think having that is really super important, and making sure, you know, you've got that.
Yeah, exactly. What you mentioned there about that kind of mindful minute, it's like, you know, when you said earlier, you know, you've got the laundry list of things to do and you're like, I'll just work through my lunch and that will be okay. But really, you don't know the cost it's having, isn't it? So you always have to remind yourself, look, it's a minute or 5 minutes or whatever, but actually I have to do that because it'll make everything else better. And it's too easy to kind of let go of those things because everything feels so pressing.
Absolutely. And I think it is about thinking to yourself, you know, if you were a car and you ran out of petrol, car's not going to work. we're the same. Like, if we've not got any kind of like reserve in our tank, and that could be in terms of food, it could be in terms of just taking a break from all the chaos that's going on and just giving yourself a bit of space to breathe, eat, and have a break, even as you say, if it's for 5 minutes, it can be really valuable in being in meaning that you're kind of allowing yourself to refuel enough to manage the next thing that is coming your way. So I think don't ever underestimate the importance of those small snippets of time. And even if you think to yourself, I've only got 5 minutes, that's not long enough, it really is, because it means that you're having a break. And I think if there's one message I'd really like to convey is don't ever think that a small amount of time is not going to be helpful, because it really is. And also it can be the start of establishing a habit where you are maybe able to take a little bit more time as you get used to having it in your routine.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, so going on, I think it's the last question now. So it's just, yeah, I mean, do you have any are you able to signpost us to any, you know, helpful general resources or partners just to support staff wellbeing?
Absolutely. So we do a lot around staff wellbeing. So we have part of our senior mental health lead training looks at staff wellbeing and talks about supporting staff and the importance of that. Because of course, if that bit isn't right within your school, then that is going to really have huge implications for how you are going to lead a successful school in terms of mental health and wellbeing. You know, your staff need to be hugely on board and able to manage. Otherwise, you won't be able to deliver all of these really important messages. So I think training as well around staff wellbeing. So we offer 2 different types of training. We offer a training for teachers and non-teaching staff about looking after yourself and each other. And we talk about a lot of the things we've talked about, Hamal. So, you know, how you can really sort of take care of yourself, but how you can also support colleagues, which I think is also really important. So that's one of our trainings. And the other training, excuse me, the other training is about sort of leadership. So from a leader point of view, how do you support your staff? And also with a little bit in there as well about how you support yourself. So some self-care as a school leader, because absolute recognition that school leaders are holding so much, including the well-being of their staff, the well-being of their young people, the well-being of their community, sometimes at the cost of themselves. So I think, you know, how do you then safeguard your own well-being? So a little bit in that training as well about your own sort of self-care and your own well-being. So we do those as 2 standalone trainings. There is also some really, really great resources on the Education Support Partnership, and we would massively signpost to them. We work really closely with them, and I think that the resources that are available there are amazing. And what's so great is if you work in a school, you can access all of that information for free. And also there's the 24-hour helpline that you can contact. And if you wanted to talk about anything that's maybe not even related to school, around finance or other kind of issues that you might be experiencing, they have a really good support line for that as well. So I'd really, really, you know, encourage people to look at that. We also have lots of free resources available on our website as part of the Anna Freud website, which is really, really easily accessible. And as I say, all of the details of all of our training is on there, including all of the things around staff wellbeing. But also we have some really good resources on our Mentally Healthy Schools website. So that is something else that you might want to look at. There's a really good sort of search engine within that. And all of the resources on there have been QA'd by clinicians. So everything on there is completely accessible and good to go. It's not like when you put something into Google and you might get 4,000 different things and you don't really know where they've come from. So I think it's really helpful to go to a website where you know everything is properly checked by a clinician. So yeah, and I would really encourage individual schools to look at their like local offer. So what do you have within your own community? What do you have within your own local authority or local area that could be really supportive to staff? It could be you're able to offer something through the educational psychologist within your area. It could be that there are other organisations that you can signpost to for support for staff. So knowing what is available locally for schools is really, really helpful as well.
Thank you. So I will be sharing that with my peers at work as well, with the Anna Freud website as well. That sounds great. sometimes you can get paralysis from analysis, isn't it, when you've got too many different sources. So it's great to hear. And
Absolutely.
I think that's everything. Again, thanks so much for your time, Monisha, and just for all those wise words. It's going to take a little while to kind of soak it all in. And thank you again to everyone who's tuned in, and thanks to all the lovely people who've sent in a question. I hope this has been helpful for everyone. And again, thanks for coming. Thanks again, Monisha.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you stay safe out there. Look after yourselves. Thanks again.
I'm fine. I've said I'm fine so many times. Sometimes I don't know how I feel. And other times, I just can't say it. Fine isn't a feeling though. It doesn't help any of us, let alone me. Only when I know how I really feel can I do something about it. And only when we know how other people feel can we actually help them. What if we had an easy way to connect with our feelings and each other's? How Are We is an app that helps us understand how we feel by turning feelings into numbers. So we can keep track of how we feel and do what we need to help ourselves, to help each other, and the world together. So tell me, how are we, really? If you're done with Fine too, download How Are We from the App Store and go to howmental.com for more support.